Trump's trade policies, analysis from historical perspective. When the foundations of the modern global trade system were laid at Bretton Woods in 1944, the world was a different place. America, emerging from the wreckage of World War II, aimed to establish a new economic order. The reduction of tariffs, promotion of free trade, and strengthening of multilateral agreements were the cornerstones of this vision. 80 years later, the trade policies implemented during Donald Trump's presidency and now in his second term represent a fundamental departure from this long-standing approach. But what does this change mean in historical context? Historical origins of protectionism. The protectionist approach in trade policy is not new for America. In the early 1930s, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was prepared with similar logic, protecting domestic industry, supporting the working class, improving trade balance. Policymakers of that era also thought they could ensure economic stability by erecting walls against foreign competition. The results unfolded differently than expected. Other countries retaliated, global trade volume contracted, and contributed to the deepening effects of the Great Depression. According to economist Douglas Irwin's calculations, tariffs accounted for approximately 14% of the 25% decline in global trade between 1929 and 1933. This historical lesson holds critical importance for policymakers. According to research by Harvard economist Jeffrey Frankel, the short-term benefits of protectionist policies are typically overshadowed by long-term costs. However, political cycles lead politicians to prefer tools that can deliver quick results. Trump era, new approach, old tools. Trump's trade strategy differs from traditional protectionism in several ways. The goal is not just general economic protection, but gaining supremacy in specific strategic sectors and enhancing competitiveness, particularly in the trade war with China. Power struggles over technology transfer, intellectual property rights, and strategic materials come to the forefront. A historical parallel to this approach is the trade tensions experienced with Japan in the 1960s. During that period, America also took protective measures in steel, textile, and automotive sectors against increasing Japanese exports. However, the difference of that era was the attempt to resolve the problem through multilateral negotiations. The voluntary export restraint system that began in the late 1960s was an attempt to control Japan's share in the American market. This process contains important lessons about how current China-America tensions could be managed. During that period, Japan showed compliance with restrictions, while simultaneously increasing its technological capacity and moving toward higher value-added products. Transition from multilateralism to bilateralism. One of the most striking features of Trump's trade policies is the shift away from multilateral agreements like WTO, NAFTA, toward bilateral agreements. Withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, renegotiating NAFTA, and criticizing the WTO are examples of this tendency. This approach also has historical precedent. In the 1930s, America turned to bilateral trade agreements with the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act. However, in the post-World War II period, the multilateral system was seen as more effective, and this direction was preferred. The basis of criticisms toward the WTO system lies in the claim that the system cannot respond to America's changing needs. The Trump administration argues that WTO rules are inadequate, particularly regarding state-supported companies and forced technology transfer. Some of these criticisms also find response in academic circles. Economists like Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia University indicate that the current form of globalization increases social inequalities. This perspective argues that trade policies should consider not only economic efficiency, but also social impacts. Economists' assessments. Academic evaluations of trade policies paint a complex picture. Free trade proponent economists point to welfare losses resulting from tariffs. According to calculations by the Peterson Institute for International Economics, tariffs during the Trump period brought an additional annual cost of $600, $800 for the average American family. On the other hand, strategic trade theory advocates offer a different perspective. Economists like Darren Akimolu from MIT indicate that protective policies can show competition-enhancing effects in the long term under certain conditions. Particularly in technology-intensive sectors, the argument that short-term costs can be balanced with long-term strategic gains is put forward. Princeton economist Paul Krugman's analysis is more critical. According to Krugman, Trump's trade policies are based more on political calculations than economic logic. The implementation of steel and aluminum tariffs with national security justification created controversy in academic circles. Luigi Zingales from the University of Chicago approaches the issue from a different angle. Zingales argues that the winner-loser dynamics created by globalization trigger political reactions. Therefore, trade policies should be evaluated not only in terms of efficiency, but also distribution justice, geopolitical dimension. Trump's trade policies have not only economic, but also geopolitical dimensions. America's effort to maintain its hegemonic position against China's rise leads trade tools to become an extension of security policy. This situation shows similarity to COCOM, Coordinating Committee for Multilateral Export Controls, applications during the Cold War era. During that period, America also used trade restrictions to prevent the transfer of strategic technologies to the Soviet bloc. Today, a similar approach is being displayed in semiconductor technologies, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing fields. These policies, inherited and expanded by the Biden administration, show that technological superiority is intertwined with national security concerns. Harvard's Graham Allison's Thucydides trap theory gains importance in this context. According to Allison, tensions between rising powers and existing hegemons have historically mostly ended in conflict. In China-America competition, trade policies play a critical role in the peaceful direction of this tension, effects on allied relations. Trump's America First approach also affected trade relations with traditional allies. Tensions with the European Union, Canada, and Mexico created cracks in the Western alliance system established after World War II. This development recalls the Allied tensions experienced during the Nixon shocks of the 1970s. During that period, America's unilateral economic decisions, such as ending dollar-gold convertibility, also led to cooling in relations with Europe and Japan. Particularly, the application of steel and aluminum tariffs to NATO allies led to debates about separating security alliance from trade policies. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's reaction showed not only the economic but also political dimensions of the issue. The European Union's retaliatory tariffs signaled the beginning of a new era in transatlantic trade relations. The EU's targeting of symbolic American products like Harley-Davidson, bourbon whiskey, and Levi's jeans showed how trade wars could become political tools. Corporate adaptation strategies. One of the most concrete effects of trade wars was multinational corporations reorganizing their supply chains. Large companies like Apple, Nike, and Ford began shifting their production from China to countries like Vietnam, Mexico, and India. This process resembles the industrial restructuring experienced after the oil shocks of the 1970s. During that period, companies also had to change their production processes and locations against rising energy costs. The concepts of nearshoring and friendshoring became popular during this period. Companies began making supply decisions considering not only costs, but also geopolitical risks. This trend could lead to permanent changes in the geographical distribution of global value chains. Large retailers like Walmart, Target, and Amazon pursued supplier diversification. These companies' experiences contain important lessons about how global supply chains can be made more flexible. Special situation in the technology sector. The technology sector holds a special position in Trump-era trade policies. Restrictions on Chinese companies like Huawei, ZTE, and TikTok show that trade policy is intertwined with national security concerns. This approach recalls measures taken against Japan's rise in the semiconductor industry in the 1980s. During that period, America also tried to limit Japanese competition in strategic technology areas. Industrial policy tools like the CHIPS Act show America's effort to increase technological independence. This approach moves away from traditional free market economy understanding, envisioning active state role in strategic sectors. The geographical concentration of the semiconductor industry, Taiwan's 60% share in global production, increases single point of failure risks. This situation makes the need for diversification of technology supply chains more urgent. Effects on farmers and workers. The social effects of Trump's trade policies present a complex picture. While some groups like steel and aluminum workers benefited from protectionist measures, soybean and corn producers suffered from China's retaliatory tariffs. The situation resembles the contradictory experience of the agricultural sector in the 1930s. During that period, protectionist policies protected some sectors while narrowing export opportunities for others. Particularly farmers in the Midwest were seriously affected by China's suspension of soybean imports. The importance of states like Iowa, Illinois, and Nebraska during election periods shows the political dimensions of these effects. Labor unions also display a divided stance. Organizations like United Steelworkers support tariffs, while unions in export sectors express concerns. This situation shows that the working class's attitude toward trade policies is not homogeneous. Transformation of global value chains. One of the long-term effects of trade wars is the structural transformation of global value chains. According to McKinsey research, 93% of companies began taking flexibility-enhancing measures in their supply chains. This transformation reshapes not only China-America relations, but the geography of global trade. Countries like Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Mexico began becoming beneficiaries of the China Plus One strategy. However, the costs of this process are also high. According to Boston Consulting Group calculations, supply chain diversification leads to an average 10 to 15% cost increase. This additional cost could increase inflationary pressures. The regionalization trend is also strengthening. Regional agreements like USMCA and RCEP point to an era where global trade is organized more in regional blocs. Financial market effects. Trump's trade policies led to increased volatility in financial markets. Following tariff announcements, fluctuations occurred in exchange rates, commodity prices, and stocks. Emerging market currencies lost value against the dollar. Sudden movements in commodity markets in steel, aluminum, and soybean prices showed the broad effects of trade policies. Inflation dynamics. Fed research shows that the direct effect of 2018-2019 tariffs on inflation remained limited. New York Fed economist Mary Amidi's study shows that tariff-related costs were largely borne by American consumers. The lower-than-expected price effects in some categories showed the flexibility of supply chains. In the long term, supply chain diversification costs are expected to be reflected to consumers. Sectoral analysis. Trade policy's effects on different sectors show a heterogeneous distribution. While employment increased in metal processing and steel production, cost pressures were experienced in import-dependent sectors. The automotive sector presents a particularly complex situation. Producers like General Motors suffered from steel tariffs while benefiting from reduced competitive pressure from China. In the technology sector, the situation is clearly negative. Companies like Apple, Google, and Microsoft faced both high tariffs and retaliation risks in the Chinese market. Academic perspectives. Academic projections on long-term effects vary. Peterson Institute's Carolyn Freund foresees 0.5 to 1.0% loss in global growth from trade wars. Harvard's Kenneth Rogoff argues differently, claiming current global trade system contains unsustainable imbalances, making such adjustments inevitable. University of Chicago's Raghuram Rajan emphasizes developing policies, considering social costs of globalization alongside trade policies. International responses. The World Trade Organization's crisis during the Trump period raised concerns about the future of the multilateral trade system. The appellate body becoming dysfunctional created a serious gap in resolving international trade disputes. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank's downward revisions in global growth forecasts due to trade tensions reveal the macroeconomic dimensions of the issue. G7 and G20 tensions also indicate that international economic coordination is becoming more difficult. Future perspectives. Trump's second-term trade policies carry great importance. The long-term consequences of America's trade strategy will affect the global system. Historical experiences show that fundamental changes in major powers' trade policies are usually harbingers of broader geopolitical transformations. Whether Trump's approach is part of such transformation will be a critical question. In this period, when economic power balances are changing, trade policies are becoming main arenas of geopolitical competition. This reality indicates that both policymakers and companies need to change their strategic approaches. Supply chain resilience. Trade policy integration with national security led to new concepts. Economic security gained prominence, with governments viewing semiconductors, rare earth minerals, and pharmaceuticals as strategic assets. Companies implement supply chain stress testing to evaluate disruptions and develop alternative strategies. Technology decoupling. Technology represents the most significant shift. Technological sovereignty emerged as nations reduce foreign dependence in critical areas. Export controls on semiconductors, AI systems, and quantum computing signal strategic competition, affecting research collaboration and investment flows. Regional trade architecture. The shift toward bilateral agreements represents restructuring with overlapping regional blocs, featuring varying rules. The Indo-Pacific Framework and Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership exemplify this trend, creating opportunities but risking incompatible rules. Conclusion. Trump's trade policies can be evaluated from historical perspective as a reflection of great power competition in the economic sphere. In periods like 19th century British hegemony questioning and early 20th century German rise, trade policies became intertwined with security policies. America's current trade strategy can be read not only as economic choice, but also as adaptation effort to changing global power balances. Trade policies became one of America's tools against China's rise. Historical experiences show these policies may have unforeseeable consequences that extend far beyond their intended scope. The 1930s protectionism experience contains crucial lessons about how well-intentioned policies can spiral out of control. The current moment represents a critical juncture in global economic history. Decisions made today regarding trade policy will shape the international economic system for decades. Manufacturing renaissance. Trump's approach involves reviving American manufacturing through industrial policy, representing departure from post-industrial thinking. Reshoring gained prominence, with companies announcing plans to return production to American soil, reflecting policy incentives and supply chain changes. The CHIPS Act exemplifies new policy providing semiconductor manufacturing subsidies. Critics argue picking winners leads to inefficiency, while supporters contend strategic industries require government support. Currency and monetary dimensions. Trade policy became intertwined with currency policy. China's designation as currency manipulator signaled willingness to use monetary policy as trade weapon. This has precedence in the 1985 Plaza Accord. Federal Reserve independence became a tension point as policies created inflationary pressures. Dollar strength undermined competitiveness gains. Environmental and social dimensions. Modern trade policy incorporates environmental and social considerations, creating opportunities for sustainable development. Trade policy and climate goals present challenges. Reshoring can lower transportation emissions, but energy intensity matters. Labor rights provisions show evolution, though enforcement remains weak. Digital trade. Digital trade adds complexity to policy. Data flows and platforms operate across borders, challenging traditional frameworks. Data sovereignty and privacy protection intersect with trade policy. EU's GDPR functions as trade barrier, while Chinese data restrictions create similar obstacles. Congressional dynamics. Congress' role in trade policy evolved with bipartisan free trade support fragmenting. Both parties expressed skepticism about existing arrangements. Trade authority delegation became controversial. Congress faces pressure to reclaim constitutional role while acknowledging practical difficulties. Institutional expertise loss creates capacity constraints. Structural transformation. Current trade policy upheaval represents structural transformation, reflecting changing dynamics, making previous approaches obsolete. Future frameworks must address state-owned enterprises, digital trade governance, environmental standards, and supply chain resilience. Success depends on delivering benefits to workers while maintaining innovation benefits. This requires sophisticated policy tools managing competing pressures. The experience demonstrates that trade policy cannot be separated from national security, technological competition, and geopolitical rivalry. This integration represents a return to historical norms. The challenge ahead involves managing competing pressures while maintaining international cooperation to address global challenges. The future of global trading systems depends on finding balance between national interests and collective action. The semiconductor industry exemplifies broader trends. Taiwan's dominant position highlights strategic vulnerabilities from excessive specialization. Supply chain disruptions have prompted governments to invest in domestic capabilities. Financial markets react sensitively to trade policy announcements, viewing these as fundamental shifts. Currency volatility reflects broader uncertainty about future trade relationships and global economic stability. Agriculture presents challenges. American farmers experience disruptions during trade wars, demonstrating network fragility. Labor markets show varied responses. Manufacturing workers benefit from protection, while export sectors face uncertainty. Understanding these patterns provides context for navigating global economic landscape. Policy choices will shape the future outlook.